Alright, this video is gonna talk a little bit about putting the radiator in, and maybe I'll even go as far as to show where I'm gonna mount the overflow tank or whatever whenever I figure that out. Also, I'll throw a video of us trying to struggle to get this front clip on the car for added measure. But what we got here is a radiator from C&R, except they're not called C&R anymore. They're called Power or PWR. I don't know, same company, but it's a pretty high quality unit. Basically it's set up exactly for second gens with an LS swap. So it, for the most part, fits the form factor to fit in the existing place. And it has the right size over here. It has the hole for the steam port. Another nice feature is right here, it actually has a built-in cooler for the power steering. So that is taken care of as well. It's got dual SPAL 12-inch brushless fans. They should suck a lot of air, like to the point where this hot car may actually be able to hover. Each one of these fans is like has 10 gauge power wire going to it, so it's a little ridiculous. I'll get into that on the wiring video, but just to give you a sense on the way it goes, it's got this little mounting bracket that it came with, bolts to the core support. I'm gonna have to make some modifications down here to the lower core support because it's kind of sitting proud and it's actually sitting a little high. So if I kind of look right there, I'm a little concerned that the radiator cap might hit the hood. So I'm gonna need to drop it down probably a 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more. So a little modification down there is necessary, or at least I'm gonna do it to get it sorted out. And I'll show you what it looks like in the front. And here it is in the front. I've got the grill surround, or the front bumper surround off, just so I could have a little more access. Also, it had some really sketchy bracing in there that I'm trying to rectify. I mentioned it in another video. The one thing I noticed is that when I put the radiator in, the radiator is centered on the car. I did check that. It is centered between the radiator core mounts to the body frame, but the hole in the radiator core from the factory isn't actually centered. It's actually that way. It's to the driver's side quite a bit. You can actually see the end tank of the radiator there. And over here, the end tank is 2 or 3 inches inside that radiator core. So that's fine for now. If I have any heat, any cooling issues, I don't think I will. I mean, I'm not running that much power, like 600, 625 horsepower or something like that on a fairly stout radiator. So, but if I do, I can always come back in here and cut out this stock radiator core a little bit more and work on the venting. But that's how it kind of sits in there. So it should look really nice. All right, so what I've done is come in here and cut this lower little core support off flush. It kind of came up here and now it's flat, so the radiator can drop down a little lower. And to hold the bottom of the radiator, I'm using this this foam that has sticky back on it, and it kind of just sits in there. I've got one over here as well, and that'll keep the radiator from vibrating and fatiguing since it's all aluminum. And then to keep the bottom in, the top had that brace like I showed in the last clip there. The bottom really didn't have anything holding it in. It had a couple little aluminum skegs welded to the bottom, but it still could have rattled around, especially in a road course or something with high braking or something like that. So what I've done is I've come in here, added a couple bolts. This hole was already here, added that hole, and just made this is a 1 inch wide by 8 inch thick steel strap that comes out and bends up. And so the radiator will sit down in here, and these will keep it from moving back. And so I don't get this steel rubbing on my aluminum radiator. What I use is a really cheap source of neoprene, which is old mouse pads. You can get them different thicknesses and such. And if you buy straight sheets of neoprene, it can not be that cheap. So, you know, just go to work, rummage around in the supply closet, get these old mouse pads, and you can cut them up and slide them in here. And then it'll be a nice energy absorbing material. All right, now that I've kind of figured out the radiator, the last really thing that I wanted to do in the front clip before I put it back on the car is to mount the radiator overflow. And if you've been following along, you know that when it is worth spending money on something, I spend it, like the radiator and the brushless fans, etc. But when it doesn't matter, I don't. And so what I have here is the finest of Chinese stuff. It's a Wuzteping 2-liter aluminum black reservoir. And so essentially what it is kind of a generic reservoir tank that they say you can use for radiator overflow or oil catch can There's no baffling inside of this, so I wouldn't use it for an oil catch can necessarily, but actually it ended up being, you know, aside from being cheaper than it should have been, it actually ended up being exactly the right size because of where I want to put it, and I'll show you in a second. I also wanted a bigger one, so this is a 2-liter Overflow because it's a fairly big engine, and I don't want to be barfing out coolant, or in my case, waterless coolant, like not ethylene glycol, on the racetrack. So I went with this larger unit. It kind of sits like that. I opened it out of the box for dramatic effect. I've actually already taken it out, and it came with all these fittings. So it's got this little sight glass set up, a little, I think it's a 3/8 bung, and another bung, and a couple of stoppers. And so I've got it kind of configured for where I want it to go. So where it's going to go is right up in here. There's kind of a flat piece of the radiator core support right here, or flat-ish. And it's going to sit kind of right in there, and then the overflow tube can run from right here straight down there. And then I can kind of see back in there for the sight glass. So the way I'm going to mount this is, because this core support isn't really flat and there's some bolts protruding through, is I'm going to actually make the pattern and punch the holes and use my riv nut tool and put 4 riv nuts, and then actually put some spacers and bring it out. And what that does is it keeps it off the flat or the non-flat core support, and it also lets me get to the cap better. The only other thing I'll mention is kind of cool is this thing has a drain plug. So if you were gonna put it somewhere you could get to it, or if you were using it as an oil catch can, you can actually take the drain plug out and drain it. I won't really be able to get to this plug where I'm putting it, but it shouldn't be that hard to get in there and do it. So you'll note that I've kind of marked a couple of spots. I'm gonna use this hole, but I won't be able to use this hole, so I'll make a new hole. Same thing on this side. I'll have to make a new hole there. So we'll get that in there, get it mounted, and then we can install the nose on the car. Clip is on the car, hopefully for the last time for a long time. So right now I'm just kind of futzing with the panel gaps and things like this and trying to get it back. It wasn't a perfect car to start with. The gaps weren't exactly correct, so I can't believe I'm going to get it any better. I'm just trying to get it passable. So right now I've just kind of got it sitting in place, and I've got this bolt right there and that one and the same ones over there, kind of getting the fore and aft situated to get this gap right here. I still need to come down, and there's another tab right behind this that kind of sets the height of this, because this is proud of the door, and so once I can roll this out of the lift, I can press this down and bolt that hidden bolt down in there, and then get the rest of it. But what I really wanted to do all this for is to set any shims that I needed under the radiator core support. As I mentioned in one of my other videos, this used to have not only this radiator core support here, which used to be rubber, but there was also a big bracket, L bracket right here that bolted to the side of the frame and then came up and bolted to this flat part of the core support. Because I've gone to aluminum here, I don't see any reason to continue to have these big heavy pieces of metal that would then just be connected with a rubber donut. So those were deleted. But for whatever reason, I need to shim these a little bit higher to get the door gaps quite right. You can't really see them with all the tape on there right now, but I have it shimmed to about 1/4 inch higher than it normally would sit on the body pucks that I have. And that's what I needed to get this gap to be approximately the same width at the bottom and at the top. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna make a couple of little 1/4 inch thick aluminum washers, and they'll get put kind of right under the body puck on both sides. And then hopefully that'll get me all aligned. And only then will I be able to figure out if I'm able to shut the hood. As you can tell, it's gonna be a real close fit.
surprise to most of you, but the domestic auto industry wasn't really a haven for precision in the early 70s, especially when it came to bodywork. So the original cars always had a bunch of shims and washers and things like that just to get the body panels to kind of fit. Here's just a small selection of the body shims that I had on my car, and they work fine. They're nice. They have different thicknesses. You can stack them up, and I could have used them again, and I could have slapped the thing on and been done with it, but I can't leave well enough alone. And when you have a lathe, every problem looks like it can be solved with a body of revolution. So instead of just taking these shims and adding some of these washers, I went ahead and just made a whole set of spacers and things. Because, you know, maybe if I save half pound, it only cost me several hours, so no big deal. All those shims I made are now in the car. I've got my spacers down here in the quarter panels. I've got my 1/4 inch spacers. You can't even see them. They're nice and shiny and pretty, but they're right underneath of here. And everything's looking like it's gonna fit. I got the radiator in, but what I wanna talk to you about now is tubes, radiator hoses more specifically. I spent some quality time at various local auto parts stores trying to find the right set of hoses that will work, as opposed to buying one of the make your own kits and things like that. So the internet suggested that this Gates 2734 would work, although they were talking about an LS swap to a G body. And this isn't, so I got it anyways, and it was really close to working, but it needs to be a little bit longer, and so I probably could have made it work in a pinch, but you wouldn't want it there all the time because it was kind of stretched to make it work. And then I went and found this Dayton 71500, and this one has like a big curve on it over here, and I actually cut it off. It kind of goes down like this, and it's slightly better, but it was still a bit of a stretch, so I wasn't really happy. So I went back, and what I eventually found was this guy right down there, which is just kind of a Z-bend. It didn't have any clocking of the ends, and this is a Continental D71852. And what I did with that one is I ended up cutting about, call it two inches off the end, this end, and that tends to fit. This CNR radiator, the hose comes off at a bit of an angle, and on the LS3 water pump, the thermostat housing comes off at a bit of an angle. So I was able to just kind of twist the hose a little bit and get it to work out. And I think this is gonna be okay. It's not kinked or anything. There's enough flexibility in there. And what I will say is that GM is really good at making radiator hose barbs, because this thing is tough to get off. Once you put it on there, it is on there. The top radiator hose actually got first try, 21837, and it's just a kind of a Z-bend. It's different sizes at either end, which works out for me. And all I had to do here was cut about 1.5 inches off this end, and it works almost perfectly. So I'll put the numbers that ended up working for me in the description if you want to reference it, but that's kind of how my radiator hoses are going to be routed, which means I can now start working on the PCV hoses and the wiring and the power steering hoses and the intake tube and everything like that. So I'll go ahead and put all that stuff on and then wrap this video up by showing you where it goes. I will point out that this is where those other spacers went, kind of right behind here. This overflow tank is spaced off so that you can kind of get down in there and make it all work out. All right, we're here on a relatively blustery day outside. The outer bands of Ian are coming through, so it's a good day to be in the barn working on the car. Pretty much got all the plumbing done up front. Yeah, we've got the PCV system right here. This is like a cheap catch can. I think it's like a 2-quart catch can or something like that. Though it does have a larger baffle and then also like a little bronze filter element. So it's actually not that bad for, I couldn't tell you what the name was. It's impossible to pronounce of the brand. Got my PCV hoses going up under there and up under the intake manifold. The radiator hoses I mentioned before are in. Right under the radiator hose is where the steam port comes in on this radiator. So I've got a piece of braided hose running down here. And then it gets up to the rest of the steam port system up there, which is the trick flow kit. So that worked really nicely just to run right along this. Let's see, what other stuff did we do here that you might care about? Power steering lines. So I've got these two power steering lines came with the unit. And then I had another one made up, which you can't even really see right there, that runs down to the pump and then down there. And then these low pressure lines are the lines that go from the power steering unit over, power steering box, over into this integrated, it's actually a transmission cooler, but I'm using it as a power steering cooler since I'm gonna have such wide 315 tires in the front, and I'll be doing some autocross. So big old cooler for the power steering comes in down here, comes up. And the reason why this has a big old belly in it to go up to the power steering is because this is where the intake's gonna go. It's gonna come off, hang a left, and come down, and try to get over in this corner as far away from the engine as possible. So kind of the next thing I need to do is get the intake set up. I already have the pieces. I need to kind of get them in place, and then I'm gonna weld this aluminum bung onto the intake so that I can mount the manifold air temperature sensor. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, get the intake mounted up, and then pretty much done with all that stuff. The sharp-eyed among you might notice that this is not the same bung that I showed you in the previous clip. And that is because welding that in became an unmitigated disaster. This is the second elbow. The first one was totally scrapped, and I'll put a short video on post-mortem on that and what I did to fix it. But I think the takeaway was a better design bung and using a piece of brass in the bung while welding to help protect the threads. Regardless, check out that other video if you want to know the details. It was pretty bad. But we now have an elbow with an bung, and the IAT will go in there. I'm gonna slap the intake setup in the car, take a quick video of it, and call it a day. Here's the intake setup in the car. As you can see, as I said, it's gonna come out, hang a left, come down, and it kind of comes down and over. I wanted to completely get it away from the fan, but it is what it is, and so the hot air is going to blow on that too, but it should be blowing enough air through that it's not going to create a huge problem. More important thing was to get this big old air filter as far away from the hot part of the engine bay as possible. Right now I just have a zip tie holding it up to the radiator, kind of hold it out of the way, but eventually I'll take a piece of aluminum and bolt it to this, and then make a baffle that'll basically, it won't completely seal it, but it'll kind of keep the heat in this side and keep the cool air over here. But yeah, all it is a 90-degree silicone elbow, cheap off Amazon. I cut it a little bit short to help tuck it in. A 45-degree elbow, which is the one I was wrestling with. There's the intake air temperature sensor, and then this big, I think it's a Spectre filter element. So yeah, there's not a whole lot of reasons why I shouldn't go ahead and fire this thing up, but we'll make that a different video.